The feeling of being there, of walking the streets of the future, is really going to be breathtaking. You're breathtaking. You're all
16 times the detail.
Then check this out.
I think it goes without saying that this is a video I never thought I'd make. But the year 2020 keeps on giving. So in all honesty, I should have seen it coming. Cyberpunk 2077 is finally out, but it shouldn't be. The game is really exceptional at times, but is also plagued with a ton of issues. I'm not entirely sure how many hours I've played so far. I haven't finished the main story just yet, but I have been playing a lot of the game. Normally, I try to do as many side activities as I can while the main campaign is active, and Cyberpunk has been no exception. For those of you who are afraid, this video is not going to be entirely negative. It is also going to be spoiler-free. As a matter of fact, I think I have a decent amount of positive things to say. However, to me, Cyberpunk is ultimately an average video game. As usual, I'm going to break this review up into a few sections. First, we're going to discuss the elephant in the room, that being the bugs. After that, I will lighten the mood and talk about what Cyberpunk does really well, followed by what Cyberpunk doesn't do so well. Timestamps provided in the description will help you find the start times to those different sections. And without further ado, let's get into it. Lord help me. While most of the game-breaking issues have been prominent on console, I chose to purchase Cyberpunk on PC. While I am aware of the many issues console players are facing, the experience I've had with the game on my machine has been different. My PC isn't some absolute monster by any means, but I don't think it's a slouch either. My specs are in the description if you really want to know my hardware. In my experience, I have encountered a wide variety of small issues. However, I think I'm fortunate in saying that I could categorize the worst of my problems as immersion breaking, and the most common ones as downright hilarious. There have also been a lot of times where I think I might have encountered a bug or two, but I'm not sure. Either there was a bug or the game is simply missing a lot of sound effects and generally isn't very responsive. More importantly though is the fact that the game was released as buggy as it is. I might not be having a ton of game-breaking problems, but that doesn't mean someone else out there isn't. So while I've been able to get through the game, I recognize that others aren't and are experiencing issues far bigger than I have. Things like textures popping in late, a hard crash here and there, and audio glitches are one thing, but the fact that the game is literally unplayable for many people is a huge problem. On one hand, I understand developing a game for multiple platforms is difficult. I can even speak from my own experience that many times a creative vision you have just isn't feasible when you're accounting for so many different kinds of hardware. It might run on your computer, but that doesn't mean it will run on everyone else's. And that's fine, technology gets outdated quickly. The problem that's risen though is that people who own base PS4 were promised this game will work on their machine, just like the people who own top-end PCs were. In retrospect, and despite the amount of sales they probably would have lost because of it, it might have been better if Cyberpunk was only released on next-generation consoles and PC. The fact that it was available for everyone on December 10th is where things start to look bad for CD Projekt Red. CD Projekt Red is a developer that has really done their best to be consumer-first and friendly up until about a week ago. Many of you are probably aware of this, but reviewers were not allowed to show their own gameplay footage in their reviews before the game was released, a rarely seen and questionable guideline. The fact that the console version of Cyberpunk was filtered before release is at best misleading and at worst unethical and manipulative. CD Projekt Red came out with an apology since then, but many console players are either having issues getting their game refunded or are straight up getting their refund request rejected due to many third parties' return policies. It's unfortunate we live in a day and age where many video games are sold to consumers broken and unfinished. I have faith CD Projekt Red will fix the bugs in time, but with the sheer amount present, it is undoubtedly going to take a long time. At the end of the day, it's a huge shame that perhaps the most hyped game of the generation released in such a poor, unplayable condition. And for so many players, their experience has already been permanently ruined. But enough of this depressing stuff, let's quickly talk about the ways in which Cyberpunk is amazing. My only prior experience with CD Projekt Red games is The Witcher 3, which I'm sure is the same for a lot of you. If you want me to summarize my thoughts on Cyberpunk as succinctly as I can, it would be the areas The Witcher excelled in, Cyberpunk excels in. The areas The Witcher wasn't so strong are also the areas Cyberpunk isn't very strong. Thanks for watching, I'll see you later. I think The Witcher is a fantastic game. It had a great world, great story, great characters, great lore, impactful decisions, but it suffered from clunky gameplay and poorly designed and unnecessarily complicated menus and UI and things like that. Easily the best thing about Cyberpunk 2077 is Night City itself. There are a lot of There are a lot of great open worlds out there and even more bad ones. But the world of Cyberpunk almost carries this game into greatness by itself. It is truly something you won't understand unless you experience it for yourself. The environments are a joy to look at with wet, shimmering streets and bright neon lights. There is genuinely so much to explore and experience. I legitimately love Night City. The artists did an incredible job designing all of the varied locations, and combining that with all of the missions and dialogue and little secrets make Night City truly unique. I can think of many beautiful looking, perfectly sized open worlds, but few manage to feel as alive as Night City does. That's part of the reason why the bugs are such a huge problem, because Night City immerses you so deeply into this universe that when these glitches occur, you get sucked extra hard out of the experience. You're not only reminded you're playing a video game, but you're reminded you're playing a buggy video game at that. I also enjoy the story of Cyberpunk, as well as the dialogue for the most part. CD Projekt Red is not only really good at creating an engaging campaign, but they're arguably the best at coming up with unique and interesting side quest missions. There are so many characters in Night City that they all have their own unique characteristics, and doing side activities with them never feels like a chore, as you are consistently taken into interesting subplots that, no matter how insignificant they may seem, have lasting effects on the main narrative. At some points, all the dialogue can get to be a little too much, to the point where I don't feel like I'm playing a video game and I feel like I'm interacting with a TV show and honestly just want to shut up and shoot something. But if you know that ahead of time when you're getting into this game, you will find yourself really enjoying the story. There were many times where I was put into situations I wasn't sure how to handle, I didn't know who was to be trusted, what to say, or where to go, and the fact that my decisions impact how the game plays out on such a minuscule level is awesome. In a way, I think it would have been better if we played as a set character instead of creating our own, because V is rather uninteresting. He's very generic with both his writing and voice acting at times. It's just kind of lifeless, very generic, like I said. I was much more interested in Geralt and his story, and I felt like he contributed more to the overall narrative. I feel like Geralt added to the story and had a genuine place in it, whereas V just kind of spouts exposition and sets up the more interesting characters, allowing them to shine and deliver meaningful dialogue. These other things kind of go without being said, but it's still good to mention. The music is really great as well as the overall art style of the game. Sure, the game falls short of The Witcher in my opinion as far as the protagonist, the writing, the voice acting, those sorts of things, but the end result is still plenty engaging and without a doubt, better than average. One thing I've been seeing a lot of that's confusing me is a group of people that make it seem like Cyberpunk would be a perfect game if it weren't for the bugs. And I have to disagree with that. I think taking all of the bugs away would make the game significantly more enjoyable, but there's no denying the decent amount of shortcomings that would still persist. I already mentioned the bugs and performance at times, so we don't need to go down that hole again, but what are the subpar aspects of Cyberpunk separate from the bugs? For starters, the UI in Cyberpunk is distracting, confusing, and downright overwhelming at times. Maybe it's just me because I haven't heard anyone else mention it, but the menu systems, particularly the HUD, are just overly integrated and stimulated. Sometimes when you're playing, there is so much clutter on screen to the point where you don't know what's happening or where you're shooting or anything like that. You'll try to be shooting an enemy and then someone will call you while another person is hacking you, causing all these just insanely overly done screen effects and sounds to be initiated right in your face. I much prefer games that only show you the information you need when you actually need to see it. The game also doesn't organically introduce you to new mechanics and controls. It seemingly has too many tutorials spammed at the beginning of the game, but also not enough, leaving you pretty confused about what's happening on screen or what button to press. Some of the buffs and debuffs and just the ways that enemies are attacking you, it just never really tells you why that's happening. Either way, they aren't integrated into missions organically, which isn't entirely necessary, but it would have been more creative, easy to understand, and I think the game just would have flowed better with more gameplay rather than so much talking at the beginning. On top of that, the controls are pretty poor. Combat gets better the more you upgrade yourself and get used to it, but it's still pretty clunky and janky feeling. It's average and serviceable. You can tell that this was made by the company that made The Witcher 3. First-person shooting is not the addictive pull of the game. I would argue it's the story instead, but the combat being meh is still worth mentioning. What's even worse though is the driving. While the cars look amazing and Night City, as I said before, is gorgeous, cars drive like they're on ice most of the time. They don't seem to have much weight to them, leaving you slipping and sliding around into things all the time. The minimap is also zoomed in so far, so if you rely on it to make turns, you'll often see the pathway, like the 90-degree sharp turn coming in way too late, leaving you no time to react, and freaking into the straight pole you go. The game also isn't balanced very well. Most of your upgrades don't seem to make too huge of an impact on gameplay. Skill points and experience are dribble fed to you, with many reports of players completing the game without even finishing one skill tree. Crafting is completely broken to the point where you might as well ignore it. And the currency system is incredibly stingy, so you'll probably never get around to purchasing cars or other items at the frequency you'd expect to in a game like this. And finally, there's just some small things and general lack of polish, like character customization being more about one statistical number, one power, armor, DPS number instead of looks. So if you want your character to have enough armor, you'll end up looking literally ridiculous. It's integrated so poorly that I wonder why this game is even an RPG at all. In all honesty, with how unbalanced many of the RPG elements are, part of me thinks this should have just been an open world action game instead. The police are really stupid, giving up on chasing you after like 15 seconds. No one seems to care or react to you pointing your gun directly at them, just randomly out in the open on the street. I know some of these are little things, but combined, they just show how unfinished this game really is. There is a general lack of completeness and polish everywhere. And the unfinished and underwhelming nature of Cyberpunk extends beyond the bugs. Cyberpunk 2077 was set up to fail in some ways. For some reason, people thought the game was going to be the second coming of Jesus Christ himself. I don't know why, but that's the feeling I got. Cyberpunk was trying to be the best open world game ever, the best story game ever, the best first-person shooter ever, the best RPG game ever, the best choose-your-own-adventure game ever, the best driving game ever, all at the same time. No game is ever going to be that good at everything, and games don't have to be great at everything to be a masterpiece. Every game is going to have its flaws, and every game is going to have its shortcomings, but games are also not measured equally. The story of a game like Destiny can be below average, but that's okay because the core gameplay, the first-person shooter mechanics, and the cooperative elements are good. The gameplay of Uncharted can be average, but that doesn't matter because the story and characters are so good, and that's what people buy the game for. We rate video games based off of the expectations set by ourselves. That's a reason why everyone hates The Last of Us 2 so much, because so many elements in that game are truly incredible. But people like The Last of Us because of the story. They liked Joel, they liked Ellie, so if that's lacking, if that's not up to par, people will say the entire experience is bad. Cyberpunk is additionally disappointed people because it promised so much. People expected it to be industry leading at practically everything. I think the story is really good, even though it doesn't really try to be deep or nuanced. The amount of choice is really good. The world is really good. But everything else is pretty average at best. Without the bugs, Cyberpunk is obviously a much better experience. Does it magically turn into Game of the Year without the bugs though? I don't think so. It's a good game, and at times it's great, but at the end of the day, it's just a video game. It's a video game worth playing through until the end for sure, and 6 months to a year down the line, I see it being a much better experience. But Cyberpunk is not going to be remembered for that, unfortunately. So many excited people have had their Cyberpunk experience ruined forever. It's no doubt that the game will improve in time, but I'm sure many people are going to associate the game with the unacceptable state it was in at launch. For me, I go back and forth whether I want to continue playing now or just wait until the game improves. I haven't had any awful problems, but if the issues I'm facing worsen, I will probably put the game down for a long while. We have seen games be released in broken and underwhelming states before. We've been misled and manipulated before. It's just additionally upsetting when it happens to be one of the most hyped games of all time, coming from a really trusted and beloved developer, a game that people waited years and years and delays and just all this stuff for it to turn out this way is truly tragic. That's all I've got to say though, guys. Down in the comments, let me know your thoughts and your experience with Cyberpunk. If you enjoyed the video, leaving me a positive rating is greatly appreciated. For more videos like this, make sure to subscribe. Thank you all so much for watching, and as always, I'll see you in the next one.